Hello, everybody. We are live, and welcome to the inaugural Mama Talks for the Mama Tribe Network After Dark series. As you can see, it's dark in at least here, and with our other mamas, and that's why we can actually sit down and have a conversation, because for a couple of us, the babies are in bed, which allows us to actually breathe and carry on as adults. So I want to introduce you to who is with us today. You can all see Mama M there, Mama MJ, if you want to give everyone a wave. She's my partner in crime.
Hi.
Hello. And then, so I'm just going to do a real quick run by and let you guys know who is with us. So then we also have here Michelle Sexton. And Michelle Sexton started her career as a mother and a home birth midwife. Super cool. She's now a neuropathic director and serves as the executive medical research director at the Center for the Study of Cannabis and Social Policy. So she is the woman in the know. She is also the founder and chief science officer of, how can I say this, Michelle?
It's VitaLab.
VitaLab, thank you. The first Washington State cannabis testing facility. And Dr. Sexton is a technical advisor and editor on the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia Cannabis Monograph. She is internationally known for her clinical practice, research, and patient advocacy. So holla over there to Michelle. And then next to her, we also have Lori Wolfe, who is the director of MotherToBaby, North Texas, Teratogen. Did I get that right?
Teratogen.
Dang it. My Greek professors in school are cringing right now. The North Texas, say it again?
Teratogen
Service. She is a board-certified genetic counselor. And MotherToBaby North Texas is an affiliate of Otis. And Otis is the Organization of Teratology.
Yep.
Information specialists. So these two women know the shit. These two women know everything that we need to know about tonight's topic, which is moms and marijuana. Tonight's topic is about the judgment-free discussion about the realities of cannabis consumption in motherhood. The fact of the matter is that throughout the country, the use of cannabis and marijuana, both recreationally and medicinally, is on the rise. Accessibility is increasing, and social stigmas are starting to change, which is an opportunity for us to learn and understand the true impact that this plant has, both medicinally and in an industrial sense. So from that scope, we're really fortunate that things are shifting. And particularly for mothers who have had questions for a very long time that they have been afraid to ask, now is an opportunity for us to ask for them. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to pose questions that mothers from our different social groups and gatherings that we've gone to have posed to us in order to make sure that everything is okay. They're going to remain anonymous. And I do want to state for all of us here in this hangout today that this by no means represents legal or medical advice. That everybody has to go out and consult their own physicians and their own lawyers in regard to their own and their family's medical and legal health. So I'm going to take a breath after that because I was a little bit stressed about this whole thing. But yay! So thank you so much, ladies, for coming together and making this a reality because it's something that I've wanted to talk about for a very long time. So really quickly, if you want to just go ahead and say hi and give us a little quick spiel about yourself and why you decided to come tonight to be a part of this conversation. So we'll go ahead and start with you, Lori.
Well, I have been running my Teratogen service here in Texas since 1991, and I've been part of our Otis organization the whole time. I'm actually the past president of Otis also. And basically, we are a service to answer any type of questions that women may have during pregnancy and breastfeeding. It's, of course, all confidential. It's non-judgmental, or what I like to say, non-directional. In other words, all we're doing is providing them with the factual information as we know it. We're not in any way trying to say that what they're doing is good or bad, or they should or shouldn't. So really, our goal is to always give them the most recent and up-to-date information so that they can make educated choices about what to take or use during their pregnancy and while breastfeeding.
That's fantastic. Wonderful. And I really appreciate the use of the word educated, an educated decision, because in just my research and preparing for this alone, on a first glance, it's really hard to find any information about consumption during pregnancy and or breastfeeding, which is the time frame that we're looking at in particular tonight. So yeah, super excited to have you. And Michelle, you have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay, let's see where to start. Well, I was just I found this book on my shelf, which I bought in 1978, and I got very interested in midwifery and read that book and was totally captivated, and then went on to become a midwife. It was another decade or so later. And so I probably accessed the Teratogen service in Texas. That was where I trained as a midwife and caught babies for about 10 years, I guess, until I went back to school and decided to go to naturopathic medical school. But in the process of just practicing midwifery, this was West Texas, and there was really only one doctor who was even open to anything alternative, such as families who didn't want to vaccinate, or supporting women in home birth, providing some medical backup, seeing the babies, and that kind of thing. So we were all really just a support group for one another. But honestly, at that time, cannabis really didn't come up much. And I was aware that it was prevalent at the farm where Ina May Gaskin had written the book. But it really didn't come up for me much again until I got to Washington State. I got involved in some cannabis research through the University of Washington, and ended up doing a postdoc in a lab there on actually multiple sclerosis, but became very interested in the expanding medical use of locally accessed cannabis, wanting to know what were people using. And this was 2010. There was really not, there was no testing. Nobody knew much about the potency. All that anyone could access was THC dominant plant varieties, which is all anybody's accessed now for several decades. But then more recently I did write the review article for the monograph on pregnancy safety. So that was really interesting to look into everything we knew from a scientific perspective on the endocannabinoid system, what it might mean for those plant cannabinoids to be affecting this system in the body, particularly reproduction. But I'm also very interested in the role cannabis can play in women's health.
So good. And earlier I posted on our event page an article that you wanted to share with everybody from Ladybud magazine, which I did. So I posted it on the event page. But do you think maybe we could have access to the monograph article at some point as well?
The monograph isn't published yet. I think at the latest it will be published by the end of the summer. So yeah, it's a work in progress.
Well, we'll have to keep our eye out for it. That's for sure, definitely. And MJ, tell us about you and why you were so excited to take part in this.
Well, I am MJ. I am, of course, partners with Erin, so we come as a package deal, I think, lady. And yeah, I mean, well, you know, obviously I have my podcast, All Things Crunchy, and I just really know a lot of moms who are interested in the topic, and so, you know, I know that we got a ton of questions posting and a ton of anonymous emails, and you know, so I think that it's I'm thank you for bringing this topic, you know, to a hangout so that we and having these people here who can help get these questions answered. So I'm just I'm always interested in supporting mamas, and especially breastfeeding mamas, and just, you know, whatever ways that they need help. So hopefully we can help answer their questions.
Yay! Well, we are Mama Tribe. We are Mama Tribe. That is for sure. So I basically broke this down into the two different segments: the consumption during pregnancy and the consumption during breastfeeding. But before we go into that consumption, I wanted to know if you could explain or clarify the use of the phrases large amount and frequency. Because, as I said, in any of the studies or any of the articles that I, as a layperson, was able to find, everything was based on that. How much was used and how often. So who would like to speak first? Lori, Michelle?
Well, I can say just a bit about, we've conducted a cannabis youth survey it's in collaboration with Bastyr University and the Center for the Study of Cannabis and Social Policy, and part of it was to get user data. And what we got from the users who filled it out, and there's been around 2,500 people fill out the questionnaire so far, is that the heaviest use reported is all day, every day. So people that are pretty tolerant to cannabis will feel the effects for about an hour and then, you know, want to smoke again. So these could be pain patients, you know, that are using very habitually, or just people who've used heavily for many years and their endocannabinoid system's really been downregulated as a result, and so they have tolerance. So, you know, that I'm not sure how Melanie Dreher and some of the other researchers exactly classified it, because it's not always clear in the literature what they considered heavy use.
Right.
But I mean, when we think of cigarettes, you know, we think a pack a day is heavy use. But, you know, this is a different character. But, you know, smoking 2 grams a day, I would personally, as a doctor, I would consider that pretty heavy use.
Okay, I have to be honest. You say that number of, and that means nothing to me. So is it like I don't know? Is it,
you know, a marijuana flower, you know, about this size is about 1 gram.
Okay. Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, you know, people who are tolerant, that's not a lot to them necessarily. Okay. And now we also have, you know, what wasn't around were these concentrates. I mean, there was always hash, but now there's even more highly refined concentrates that are like 3 to 5 times more potent than flower. So now we really have to redefine heavy use.
So that you brought up something, and I'm really curious about it, because you said that about an hour will go by before they'll want to smoke again. So is that how the potency is gauged, by how long the effects are felt?
Well, not necessarily, because what's been shown in a time course in humans is that most people, when studied, after between 1 and 3 hours, they say, you know, their experience of being high is altogether gone. So when I say 1 hour, I'm referring to mostly pain patients that I've worked with, that they will have pain relief for about an hour. That's with smoked. With oral, you can have effects much, much longer, actually.
Okay, great. And that was my next question also, was in relation to the manner of consumption. Um, do we, or are there major differences in how a pregnant or a breastfeeding mother consumes, whether it be edible, topical in like a salve or an ointment, or smoking, or even, I guess, like a tea, or ingesting it in that other way? Does that affect, what kind of effect does that have, I should say?
Yeah, that's all going to have effects because, with inhalation, you're bypassing the gut and the liver, and so it's going directly into the bloodstream. It goes in directly to the brain. If it goes into the bloodstream, it's going to get into the placenta really quickly. It does cross the placenta. It's been shown to cross the placenta. So it's a pretty direct delivery route. There's no change made to the THC. It stays the compound that it is.
Okay.
When you eat it, everything gets taken up in the gut and first passes through the liver before it goes out to the rest of your organs. And so when it goes through the liver, your enzymes, your liver enzymes, your liver enzymes, your liver enzymes, everybody's different, but there are enzymes that convert the delta-9 THC to an even more potent compound called 11-hydroxy-THC. So one thing is that we can all have variable effects based on this conversion. And so when ingesting, you have to take even smaller amounts because of this more potent form that the liver makes. And so that there's no doubt that that compound probably also crosses the placenta. And it is more potent at the receptor, and this is why you hear reports of, people having, adverse events with edibles. You have to be careful. Even though bioavailability is really low, it's a very, very potent compound. So you have to be careful.
There was that journalist that ate a whole chocolate bar in Denver. I can't recall her name.
After she was fully warned and instructed, she did it anyway. I guess to make a news story. And then you mentioned tea, which is interesting because Melanie Dreher's first study, when she went to Jamaica, and I talk about this in the article, she reports that women largely did not smoke cannabis in Jamaica. It was mostly something that men did, and women drank cannabis tea. And there's a research report showing that when you make tea with cannabis, typically the amount of heat and the length of time it's heated is not enough to convert very much THC acid to THC. So it stays more in the non-psychoactive form. We don't know as much about the THC acid. It likely does not cross the blood-brain barrier. People don't report, and it's not reported to be psychoactive. We don't know if it has effects in the periphery still on the endocannabinoid system. We know relatively little about it.
Fascinating. I'm listening to you speak, and I realize why people dedicate their lives to this. Because just the vocabulary alone, I'm just
sorry.
No, I love it.
Everybody knows what I'm talking about.
I am a word geek, but I can see how
Yes.
it can.
You are.
I can see how it's a little. It can be daunting and overwhelming also for the layperson to kind of like understand the true ramifications or potential consequences of this, because we really don't. And I think part of the reason we don't know so much is because of the prohibition and the social stigma. So I'm hoping that as things progress, the viability of cannabis being more kind of universally accepted will change, because I've seen shirts made out of this stuff.
Well, I have a question. I don't know if anybody can answer, but why is there a reason why the studies aren't done on marijuana? Just
on marijuana and pregnancy, or are you talking about any clinical entity?
Yeah, just like I think more on our topic with moms and marijuana, breastfeeding marijuana, pregnancy marijuana, like why wouldn't they spend the money, I guess?
Well, just quickly, briefly, and then I'll stop somebody else talk. There has been a research bias because of Schedule I status. It's considered to have no medical benefit. So it would be inconsistent for our federal government to fund medical studies when they say it has no medical benefit. And so therefore the research bias and the funding has been for studying it as a drug of abuse. So if you go look at the literature, the studies, which are often in the form of questionnaires, so it's self-reporting, are done on populations of women that are typically already addicts and polydrug users. So they're using other substances in addition to marijuana. So a lot of the data that we have on pregnancy outcomes, it's really difficult to untangle, what the social factors, economic factors, other drug use, nutritional status may also be having on the outcome. Right. So, and it's unethical to study anything really in pregnant women because we can't experiment with babies in the womb.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. At least because of our ethics, that we can't do that.
Well, and two, I just wanted to add, as Dr. Sexton was saying, a lot of the data we have is retrospective because it's going to be from gathering the data as we've talked to these moms. So if we enroll them in pregnancy studies, we're going to be looking at something else. The marijuana might be something they're using on the side. So it's not something that we're going to be studying directly. And it is very hard to tease apart the cigarette smoking, for instance, from the marijuana and the drink of wine that they're having each night or so on. And so it has been hard. It's not that there's not a lot of studies. I mean, if you look at the quantity of data over the last 50 years, there's over 100 studies. So it's not that the studies aren't out there, but the studies are very hard to decipher. And that's sort of where we are. My service is sort of like the link between the people like Dr. Sexton and all the people doing the research, and we're between the researchers and the consumer, so that the person, the pregnant lady, the breastfeeding lady, can call us up, and our role is to try to decipher that information and put it in words that she can understand to help her determine in her individual case, is there a risk or not.
And Lori, Otis is national, right? So pretty much every city has a chapter, or there's a national line or something like that?
Well, there is a national line. So yes, to answer your question, Otis is actually North America, so we have some Canadian services also. But there's not that many of us. Even counting the Canadian services, there's only about 20 of us, about 17 in the United States, about 3 in Canada. But we do cover the entire United States. Our 866 number, you can reach one of us no matter where you call from.
That's fantastic. A lot of work for you, but fantastic. So we'll make a point of having that also, that information also on our event page, so people can contact either the national or a local affiliate to Otis. So I want to go ahead and jump into some of these questions since we've kind of established common ground here. One of the first questions that came in had to do with this mom that she doesn't actually smoke herself. She does not ingest cannabis at all. A family member does, however, and while this family member doesn't smoke in the vicinity of her or her infants, she's concerned because this person will come into the house shortly after smoking, and she just wants to clarify that there is no potential second or third hand smoke issue. Would it be possible?
Not in my opinion, not from carrying the smoke on her clothing. On the other hand, if she was sitting next to this person who was smoking continually many times during the day, I would be a bit worried about secondhand smoke exposure. But as far as carrying the fumes in on her clothing, I wouldn't give her any known increased risk at all.
Fabulous. I know she's going to be very pleased to hear that. She was very, very concerned. And then another question had to do with co-sleeping. Michelle, you and I had chatted about this before. One of our followers had said that she'd accidentally ingested some, and while it the effects had worn off, she was worried about co-sleeping with her child. Would the effects, even the delayed effects, did she have a valid concern?
Well, I was unclear on what her concern was exactly. Was it that she was going to roll over on the infant, that it was going to ooze out of her skin onto the baby? Neither one of those to me is a concern.
Okay.
You know, while cannabis can be sedative, it doesn't put you into a coma, although if you got a really, really large dose, which can happen with edibles, you might be aware of what's going on and unable to respond. But that would have to take, it would be a really, really large dose, and that's why I tell people, if you're going to do an edible, do what she did. Just take a little nibble and don't take any more until you know how that affects you. Unless it's, you know, purportedly been tested and you know a milligram dose. 10 milligrams would be a high dose to take orally for a lot of people. 5 milligrams might even really be high for a lot of people. So, you know, I start patients when they're going to try something oral, and often it'll be a tincture form, to start with 1 to 2 milligram doses and see how that works before you go any higher.
Excellent. Excellent. And again,
that's of THC specifically.
Lori, did you have anything you wanted to add to that one?
No, I have to say I was confused by the question also, but I think she's probably worried about rolling over, you know, am I going to possibly lay or smother the baby when I'm not aware of it? But I have to say I haven't had a question like that.
Well, and doesn't that question get asked, like, even just in co-sleeping in general, like, not even, you know, it's always something that just, like, gets thrown out there. Oh, I can't co-sleep because I might roll over on my infant. So
yeah, I think that she was concerned about the squishing and may have had more apprehensions about co-sleeping in general.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I wanted to make sure that the question was asked.
For a relative effect, you know, probably drinking alcohol would sedate someone much worse than cannabis. So, just, you know, and they might think nothing about, you know, drinking some wine and going to bed. So remember relative risks.
Absolutely. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because in my research I found this really cool statistic that 7 in 10 Americans believe that alcohol is actually more harmful to a person's health than marijuana. That's 69% of the population, and these are statistics from April of this year. So these are all new stats. So really interesting.
They must have called Washingtonians.
Well,
they wouldn't have said that in Texas.
I know, right? It's from Pew Research, and they're a big, huge research house. They do a lot of solely bipartisan. And the article is 6 facts about marijuana. And I also will have that link available, and I'll have show notes for everybody with all of the resources that I looked at, so it's going to be a slew of information. But yeah, I thought that was really, really neat. A good little thing there to compare alcohol to marijuana, or cannabis, I should say.
One of the things that I've heard actually is there's been no reported deaths of anybody that has smoked or ingested marijuana, and of course there's been a ton of reported deaths for, you know, people that have been under the influence of alcohol. So that right there, you know, as far as I know, that's a true statistic, that there's been no reported. So
yeah, it's considered non-toxic, and for what you're speaking about specifically has to do with the brainstem.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we're a bunch of nerves, and all of everything that's coming out of the brain and communicating with the periphery, you know, it's like a stalk at the base of the brain, and the brainstem is there, and that's where things like your respiration and heart rate are controlled. And for instance, opiate receptors are dense in that area, and that's why people so commonly die on overdoses of opiates or pain reliever drugs that have opiates in them. And if you add alcohol to that, it potentiates it because alcohol has the same depressant effect on the central nervous system. On the other hand, there's relatively no cannabinoid receptor in the brainstem. And so that's why even if you get a huge dose of THC, it's not going to shut down respiration and heart rate. It might get really, really low, and you go into a state that's known as catatonia. So it's like a coma, although it's really thought that people still can hear, they just may not be able to respond, but their heart rate and respiration aren't shutting down.
Cool. You said catatonia, and I instantly thought of, is that a place in Spain? Sorry.
Catalonia.
Okay, I have another one here about a particularly breastfeeding moms. Breastfeeding moms that smoke or consume. Does the THC, and this is just, does the THC get in the milk and to the baby? Anybody?
My answer is yes.
Yes, we say it does too. I think it's hard to know how much, but we counsel that small to moderate amounts can get into the breast milk. There's a relatively long half-life, so it's going to be there present about 1 to 2 days, although that's going to decrease as time goes by. And what I think it's important for the nursing moms to know is that there really hasn't been a lot of problems, but if you are, it can be sedating to the baby, so that if you're you're smoking a lot or you're ingesting a lot, we would be worried, especially in a young baby, about the sedation factor. And so actually the American Academy of Pediatrics has classified the marijuana as one that you should not use, or you should use with caution, because we just don't have as much data on it as we would like.
Well, Michelle, you agree with that one? You concur?
I do. The compounds are what we call lipophilic. They love fat. So this is why brownies got popular, because somebody figured out you could take the plant and cook it in butter and, you know, pull these compounds off, because they do love fat, which means they love our fat. And as you know, breasts are made of all fat. Breast milk is a high-fat diet, and so those compounds, there's only one study that actually measured them in breast milk, and also measured it in the baby's stool. So it did pass from the breast milk to the baby and through the baby's gut and out. So the baby is going to metabolize if they get it in the breast milk.
So then the next question would be, if it was a small frequent use. So this question came in: is smoking a bowl every evening after I put my baby to bed damaging? She rarely breastfeeds at night these days. So would that small use, that small amount that does get through the breast milk of THC, is that considered, would that be considered a long-term harmful for this mother and her child?
I would say that the data has not shown that, because if we're having limited light use, we have not seen any long-term neurodevelopmental effects. But at the same time, the data is not really good. But so for the most part, I wouldn't feel that a light to limited use like that would have any known risk.
Okay. And so, here's one that I wanted to know. Okay, I'm just going to have to read this one, sorry. Smoking cigarettes versus smoking marijuana. Amount of marijuana smoke ingested is less in amount and frequency than cigarette smoke, less chemicals, toxin. Are there studies to prove this and give conclusion?
There is a researcher, he's a physiologist, and I believe he's at UCLA. I could be wrong about that. He's somewhere down here in Southern California. His name is Donald Tashkin, Tashkin. So he's spent a lot of his career looking at combustion of cannabis, which is lighting it and burning it and smoking it like tobacco. There is another option now, which is vaporization of cannabis. So you can vaporize even the whole flower. You don't have to have an extract like in a e-vape type of pen, but you can vaporize the flower. But what Donald showed, looking at lung pathology and studying it over many years, was that his research concluded that it's not carcinogenic like tobacco is. And of course, we don't know if it's because of additives in the tobacco, if it's because how it burns and the products are different from tobacco, if it's because some of the compounds in cannabis maybe are protective or acting as anti-cancer agents themselves, so it sort of balances itself out. But lung cancer is not a known high risk for cannabis smoking. There have been some associations made with head and neck cancer.
How so?
Just it's an association, so it's not saying that it's causative. It's been correlated.
Understood. Understood. Okay. MJ, did you have something that you wanted to ask while I look over these questions again? Or some kind of comment?
I'd like to maybe look into some of the studies now that I know, because from what I've known, there really hasn't ever been very many studies. But if we're saying that there's 100 out there, I'd love to see some of them, because that's information that's kind of new to me. What I was told a long time ago was just that we just don't know, because there's no conclusive information on it. So I knew that we would get information out of this show. So that was one of them that it'll be fun to kind of try to find those, look those, and check them out.
I'm very excited too.
Yeah.
I didn't find 100 clinical studies. I mean, there's a lot of studies on animal models and culture of neurons and that kind of things, but as far as actual human studies of pregnant women, you weren't referring to that, because I don't think there's as many of those studies.
No, there's not.
Okay.
So what Dr. Sexton said is true. A lot of the studies, when we gather data, we're looking at animal studies to see what the substances have done in the animal models. We're looking at neurodevelopmental studies. We're looking at the pregnancy. We're looking at everything. So when you pull in studies that have looked at pregnancy and marijuana, it's about 100. But she's absolutely right. It's not all human studies.
Okay.
Some of it's animal data that we have to sort of try to pull together and let our patients know what that means.
And is there an animal that they're specifically usually doing this study on?
No, not specifically. I mean, the ideal is always a mammal, but it's not specifically.
It's usually mice and rats.
It is.
Okay.
No, that's not ideal.
Honestly.
Okay. Well, and the one that you mentioned, Michelle, that study would be interesting because it was a breastfeeding mom and a baby. So if that one is available, then that would be cool to kind of check out, to just find out, because I think that's that's kind of our culture and the where we live. People just kind of look for that information. When they don't, then they have to make their own decision, which is something that usually I have to tell moms. It's a personal decision, because there's really nothing I can send you to say this is bad. There's nothing that I could send you to say that it's good. You have to decide for yourself. So
yeah, that's hopefully all of the information that these ladies have access to, and that I have recently gained access to in my deeper research for this show. Hopefully we can help make it more available to the everyday mom who has 10 minutes to sit down at her computer and research something before she takes action, before she makes a decision. Yeah. So, because like I said before, this is happening. Women are ingesting, and we just need to help them understand what their decision entails, what their actions entail.
And I think that's why they really should call people like us, because, you know, Otis, that's what we've spent years doing, is trying to, you know, look at all this data, compile it, you know, gather it together, and try to interpret it. So, for instance, we get a lot of calls on birth defects. You haven't asked that yet, but we get a lot of calls on, you know, I was ingesting the marijuana during my pregnancy. Is there any risk for birth defects? And when you look at all of this data, a lot of the studies have said no, but there's been a few studies here and there. We've seen a small 1% increased risk for heart defects. A long time ago, a couple studies. We also have seen a couple studies for abdominal wall defects, gastroschisis. Again, both of these risks are small, about 1%. They've only been shown in some studies and not in others. But it, you know, the data is there. So although we may not have 1,000 studies like you might like, or even 100 pregnancy studies on humans, there is quite a bit of data. And so it is worthwhile always calling Otis versus trying to reinvent the wheel and do those studies yourself when we've been looking at them for 20 or 30 years.
So that's actually a question that I have then, because we didn't ask about, you know, in pregnancy, we're kind of more focused a little bit more on breastfeeding here. So is there a greater risk in the studies for a pregnant mom smoking or consuming versus a breastfeeding mom smoking or consuming?
Well, the risks are actually different, but whether you're smoking marijuana or smoking cigarettes, smoking is very dose dependent. So if they're only smoking a little bit here and there, we're not too worried. Statistically, there's not going to be anything we know about. But if they're smoking heavily all day long, especially in the first trimester, or quite frequently in the first trimester, that's when you might get some of these really small risks. And as you get closer to the end of the pregnancy, some studies have shown a possibility for a little smaller baby, a little bit lower birth weight, earlier delivery, although not all studies have shown that. And again, it has to be pretty heavy, consistent use.
Gotcha.
Well, the way that I framed it, and you know, if anybody takes the chance to read the article, hopefully I was able to communicate it without being too technical, but what we know now from basic science research, and it's been somewhat established in humans as well as other mammals, is that when the neurons when the brain's developing and the individual neurons, they're going out and they're making these pathways and making connections. And we know that part of what guides this leading edge of the neuron is the cannabinoid 1 receptor. And so it's the endogenous cannabinoids, typically 2-AG in the brain, that's calling the neuron out to where it's going to connect. And so, as having studied pharmacology, you know that if you throw another compound in there that's going to bind to that receptor, there's interference with the natural process. And so if it's being used, if cannabis is being used in pregnancy and it's crossing the placenta and it's binding, you know, in the developing fetus, we don't know what the consequence of that is. We know that they typically have, you know, what was already said, there's probably low risk for birth defects, or that they're going to be smaller, or smaller head circumference length, any of that stuff. And even the short-term studies of watching the babies soon after birth, and there's even a longitudinal study that's gone on in Canada for quite a while. And what that researcher has observed is that he thinks there might be other neurodevelopmental effects that show up later in life. So not necessarily in infancy, maybe not even early childhood, but out into adolescence. So that it's still being watched if there's an increased incidence for ADD, ADHD, having any difficulties in school. And now, even beyond that, there's a term out there now called neuroteratogen. So that cannabis may one day be considered a neuroteratogen, in that it's altering how the brain is making those connections, and whether it may be in some great positive way and we're changing humanity, but it could also be detrimental. And so my personal policy is that, you know, the best policy is no drugs in pregnancy. And if you're going to consume, that you understand and make an informed choice I know as a mother myself, I have 5 children. I think it would be devastating to end up with a child who either develops schizophrenia or, some other disorder, and you wonder if it's your fault.
Mm-hmm.
Because as mothers, we constantly do that with our children. Even as they're grown, you still do it,
Yeah, definitely.
I think that we were discussing that before in another group, and I was saying that it's so easy to do that with so many things, because, for example, every time I walk into our apartment building, there's a big fat sign that says, "Hey, stuff in this building may cause cancer or birth defects," and it's so. There are so many elements around us on a daily basis that we have absolutely no control over. So having some control over what we put in our bodies or our children's bodies, it's really important, I think. But also, to a degree, we have to be able to, in my opinion, let some things go. And we all have to choose what that thing is.
Yeah.
By no means am I saying let your fears and concerns go. You need to seek advice from your own doctor or your own lawyer.
Yeah.
Not from me. I'm OG Mamacita. Yeah. There's no DR or PhD or anywhere in my name.
It's the risk benefit. I mean, just like the podcasts that we've done before about breastfeeding and postpartum depression. I mean, do you want a mom who is mentally unstable and breastfeeding, or do you want a mom who is, able to take breastfeeding safe medication and mentally stable? I mean, and you've got to, outweigh the risk versus the benefit. And so this is just kind of another element of that, what this medication could help with, but, where you are in life, you have to weigh the risk.
Yeah, actually, one of the moms that wrote in specifically mentions that her anxiety and fibromyalgia, along with anxiety and breastfeeding, has my hormones out of control. So, that's something that her physician actually recommended that she stop breastfeeding because she's having nursing aversion. Her anxiety is building up. So she's actually seriously considering cannabis in hopes to diminish that anxiety.
Well, and I think, there are ways to mitigate the risk. I mean, I'm a naturopathic doctor, and I think there's a lot of other alternatives other than cannabis. But even with cannabis, depending on where you are, now we're a little spoiled in Washington State, Colorado, because we have selection. We have items that have a profile of their cannabinoids. We have access to cannabis that is totally CBD dominant with very little THC. Cannabidiol, the secondary compound, is really the best anti-anxiety drug on the market, so to speak. But not everyone has access to that. And CBD is not psychoactive. It doesn't bind the cannabinoid 1 receptor. It has other effects. We have no idea what those effects might be on an unborn baby. Nobody's even looked at that yet. Yeah. But if the concern is the cannabinoid receptor in the brain and THC and the psychoactivity, we know that piece is missing with cannabidiol. And the other option is, like we talked about, tea being in the raw form. Yep. And you can have cannabidiol rich and use it raw. You can use THC and have THC acid raw. And often there are reports that both of those compounds could be anti-nausea, just like THC is. And so again, you'd be mitigating the potential risk of ingesting or inhaling THC. So there's options.
So glad I posed that question that mom posed that question and I got to ask it. And then, okay, so I want to just finish this last question because I thought it was kind of I'm just going to ask it. Okay, so this mom wants to know if marijuana use, could it help a breastfeeding mother with supply or letdown. So would the result of being relaxed and calm kind of like help with breastfeeding?
Well, I would say no, just because some of the studies have shown that you can actually decrease your milk supply with smoking marijuana. So I understand her question in the sense of her being more relaxed and so on, but the actual action, the compounds can decrease the amount of milk you're making. So I think it would sort of be a conflicting result.
Good, good,
Well,
good.
and it might be dose related. You know, we don't know the dose, but a lot of people are familiar with the side effect of dry mouth when smoking cannabis, the cotton mouth effect. You guys are looking like I'm crazy. I mean,
No, that's a very good correlation, because if your mouth is dry,
well,
you would have
it has a cholinergic effect. It has off-target effects on cholinergic receptors, and so if you have glands in your mouth that are drying up, then theoretically you could think of breasts as glands that could be affected and dry up.
Right.
I mean, it could be temporary, of course, but that would be my theoretical, But again, CBD is unlikely to have that effect, and it's the more powerful anti-anxiety. THC can be an what we call an anxiolytic, or getting rid of anxiety at very low dose, but most people are not consuming it at low dose. So you got to find that fine line. It's like a narrow therapeutic window. And over here, you might be calm, and then there's this middle place, and then you go over here, and it's going to cause anxiety or paranoia. So dose is really important, but that's what we can't control very well.
Right, because everybody is different, and because there isn't a standard. But isn't there the beginnings of a standard in Colorado, I believe, for like the creation or the distribution of what constitutes a dose?
Well, I mean, it's happening all over, and we actually started it in Washington State, that we decided to limit oral doses to 10 milligrams, and the whole package could not be no more than 100 milligrams.
Okay.
So 10 milligrams for an oral became sort of a standard that then Colorado also adopted. That doesn't, I can guarantee you, I don't want to eat 10 milligrams of THC. Everybody's system is different. There's gender differences, there are age differences. The endocannabinoid system in our body, the biochemical system, is purported to peak in puberty. So, it's been proposed by researchers that, children have really high levels of these endocannabinoids, and so they're already, quote-unquote, stoned.
Love it.
I know. I mean, I watch my grandkids, and like, they are totally stoned. I'm convinced,
Just high on life.
Yeah.
Oh, totally.
The natural compounds. So, there's changes over lifetime. How these compounds might affect us. So you have to keep that in mind.
So really quickly, before I hand this over to you girls, somebody in one of our groups had said that there are naturally occurring cannabinoids in breast milk. Is that true?
Yeah, it's just what I was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
They're these. They're made from fatty acids. So we eat fats. Our cell makes their cell walls out of fats. Endocannabinoids are made on demand from the fats in our cell wall. And the two major endocannabinoids, AEA, or what's known as anandamide, which means bliss in Sanskrit. AEA is one that's very involved in the reproductive cycle. It's been shown in breast milk. There's a whole family of them, but the two major ones that bind the cannabinoid 1 and 2 receptor specifically and directly are anandamide and 2-AG. 2-AG is thought to be the more active endocannabinoid in the brain, but we still have a lot to learn about these compounds in humans. We don't have good assay tools. It's not like you can go to your doctor and have your endocannabinoid system profiled yet. That may be coming.
Very cool. Well, this information has just been really awesome. The conversation, I could talk for hours on this, but I'm sure that you ladies, especially you, Lori, you're in a different time zone, so thank you.
Thank you.
At least it's not a school night, right?
Yeah, you're right.
And so before we bid adieu, or see you later, alligator, is there anything you ladies want to say, feel that may not have been broached and should be heard before we sign off?
Well, I think my whole thing would just be, again, to make a pitch for Otis that, you know, we're out here to provide anyone with free counseling. We do have the data that's out there. We'll do our best to give you a good risk assessment as to whether or not you do have a risk or not, and it's all confidential, and, you know, we can hopefully help you.
Awesome. Michelle?
Well, that was so upbeat and positive. I was just thinking of one other piece of research that I wanted to mention, which in animals, when they knocked out the cannabinoid 1 receptor in animals, the baby animals die.
Oh, wow.
And it's been discovered that it's due to failure to thrive because the animals cannot suck.
Wow.
So there's some connection between the cannabinoid 1 receptor and the sucking reflex. And that, it just haunts me, because when I was a midwife, I had a client one time that, you know, this is back in Texas, you didn't talk about it, but I feel really, really confident in retrospect that they were using marijuana, maybe heavily, and her baby would not suck.
Wow.
It was failing to thrive. And I was begging her to take the baby to the doctor, and then, you know, they were lost to follow-up for me because I was being, you know, people sometimes just don't want to hear it. And I don't think they really wanted to hear it. But when I learned this about the failure to thrive and the sucking, that case came back to me. So, you know, just another reason to think really carefully about use in pregnancy and use of anything. And in my article, I talk about, you know, even exposure to many environmental things. We need to really think about, you know, our environment in a big picture, but specifically what we're going to inhale or put into our bodies when we're pregnant.
Yeah.
I know that I can speak for myself and MJ in that our outlook on life around us and within us changed incomprehensibly the moment we found out we were pregnant. So, yeah.
I felt high as soon as I mean, I was, besides, actually, I was sick for the first couple of months, but otherwise, oh my God, I was like, you know, sober, no drinking, you know, like I felt great. I wouldn't even want to bring anything else into my system, but I understand, you know, some people don't have that ability, or, you know, have that, have like addiction type stuff, but yeah.
So I thank you, Em, thank you, Michelle, and Lori, so very much for popping this cherry. We broke the show. We started this Mama Talks, and I have a feeling that we will have a few more episodes on this topic.
Yeah.
We are going to post that our followers and listeners can come back and shoot us more questions that we will get to you. We will give them, obviously, Otis information and so forth, and the links to your articles, Michelle, so they can do a bit of research on their own. But I guess I can't say thank you. I can't say thank you too many times. So
well,
I
wanted to say thank you to you because of what Michelle was saying. You know, the people that are in our tribe, the people that are our viewers, the people that we're trying to reach, I think that genuinely we all just want to do the best that we can for our kids. So touching on this topic, Erin, and bringing it, to a hangout and bringing it out to the people, I think is helpful because, we don't really know what decisions to make if we don't have the education, if we don't have the information. So, hopefully this is helpful because I do absolutely positively know that the people that we are surrounding ourselves with, the people that we're trying to reach, they just want the best for their family and their kids. And so, hopefully this is just one thing that can help them.
I'm with you, sister.
Hopefully we could, I think a great topic also would be to talk about beyond breastfeeding and cannabis and women's health and other topics in women's health.
We will set a date this week, sister. Definitely.
And I think probably one other show would be probably cannabis in children too, because
the pediatric cannabis.
Oh my gosh! I mean, I know that you did that, kind of touched on that a lot in the podcast that we did a while ago. But it's definitely something that I think that people don't realize how helpful it can be when you have something, an illness or a disease that is just
Yeah, they've given hope to a lot of families, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And if you, our viewers, listeners, have some ideas or have some hopes that you hope we can broach a topic, write into us, momtribenetwork@gmail.com. Look for us on Facebook, and I am on Twitter, OG Mamacita, and recently meerkatting, but not too good at that yet. So, so thank you, ladies, and everybody. Say goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.